Hello from Redmond. I'm Arden White, Principal Security Engineer, and I'm your moderator. And I'll hand off to Kevin.
Hey, great to be here again. I'm Kevin Sullivan from our Windows ecosystem and commercial engagement team. My team works with our OEM partners who are building and maintaining secure Windows 11 PCs. Over the last several years, we've spent a ton of energy working with these partners to prepare for the secure boot update we're talking about today. Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard Powell. I work in the Windows Servicing Delivery org. We engineer fixes for in-market platforms. I've been working on the secure boot issue for quite a few years now, along with Scott. So Scott, I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, my name is Scott Shell. I'm an architect in the Enterprise and Security org, and I have been working on secure boot for quite a number of years.
Okay, first question we have is, what happens to devices after the certificates expire? So on devices that don't have the new certificates and the certificates have expired, they'll continue to boot, they'll continue to run. The only thing that'll, the security updates will continue to install. The place that will be affected on these devices is you won't get security updates for the boot manager and secure boot, so it will put your boot chain at risk. I guess the other question would be is what happens if my device certificates have expired and you if you have the certificates on your device, you should still be able to apply them unless there's an issue that's blocking them.
So this question is related. However, what happens? I understand the devices will continue to boot after June 2026 when secure boot is active. However, what happens if there are changes to boot manager or the underlying hardware? What would be the impact? Can we let such a device live until hardware dies to avoid replacement still good working hardware? So this one's a little bit complicated because after the certificates expire, if you don't have the new 2023 certificate installed, then we can't update boot manager. So Windows Update will continue to apply, but it won't be applying the new boot manager, which means you won't be getting security fixes in boot manager. You won't be getting other potentially functional fixes in boot manager. If you don't have the up-to-date certificates, obviously security is impacted, but devices should continue to function. Richard, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that people realize the security impact though, right? I mean, you become susceptible potentially to rootkits and some pretty bad potential malicious issues, software out there. So I do, yes, the device will boot, it will be functional, but IT admins should be very aware of this impact, that's just the security impact that will have in their environment.
Okay, next question. If a firmware update for an older machine is released after June 2026, will it be possible to install, deploy the new certificates manually at that point?
I can take this one. So let me just step back for a second and say that we, of course, recommend that customers keep their firmware up to date, check with your OEM support sites, get that latest firmware for all sorts of reasons around security and reliability. Most devices that we see are not going to need a firmware update in order to get the new certificates from Windows. There are some where we've identified potential issues where they do need to get that update. And so in this specific case, if you get that firmware update that unblocks our certificate update, you then can apply that certificate update after June 2026.
Yeah, and I mean, our controlled featured rollout that we've talked about previously, will newly detect the device once it has the firmware updated. And if we detect that that firmware is now good to take the update, we will deploy it to the device.
So the next question is, can you provide clarification on this? Does Microsoft currently deploy the Secure Boot 2023 certificates using a hybrid rollout model, telemetry-based CFR combination with optional policy-based control?
I'll take that one. Yes, it's a multi-layered rollout. We have a lot of different mechanisms. Microsoft is controlling a telemetry-based CFR that we're using for deploying to devices in stages to make sure that we're rolling out as safely as possible. When we figure out that a particular bucket of devices is accepting the secure boot updates well and not having any problems, that device category moves into the LCU. So customers who at that point take an LCU update will see the secure boot certificates update automatically. Enterprises have the ability to override that and disable the update from the from the LCU, but by default that will deploy. In addition to that, if the enterprise has disabled that, or if they want to push it separately, enterprise rollout mechanisms are available to set the registry keys and control the rollout manually.
Okay, next question. At what point will policy-based opt-in become the primary or required mechanism for IT managed devices?
I don't think it will ever. We envision the primary method for IT managed devices probably to be the LCU buckets, right? Like once the devices go through CFR, we have a lot of confidence that that bucket of devices is safe to deploy the firmware updates to. We'll put that in the LCU. So for the IT managed devices, as soon as they take that LCU, we'll say, yep, this is a safe device to update the firmware, and we'll apply the firmware. And that's what we look at as the primary model. The CFR model would be something that allows customers to get things sooner. And then it also, the LCU obviously lags the CFR process by a few weeks. And then, of course, IT administrators, like Scott just pointed out, have the ability to push it out to their devices as well if they want to get ahead of the game.
I think there's more that we need to say, though, because I think in a large organization, there's going to be devices that we don't see on CFR and can't put in the LCU. For example, servers are probably not going to show up in that. So I think it's important that IT managers monitor their devices and understand the different devices they have in their environment and ensure that the devices are getting updated. And servers is certainly one piece of that. Conference room devices or IoT devices that that aren't on CFR would or ones that probably should be focused on.
Yeah, I love that, Arden. And I think the important thing is monitor, look at your telemetry, identify what devices are rolling out, and develop a plan for those devices that have not been deployed automatically through the LCU. Work with your OEM, work with your vendors, develop a plan for those devices. And that might involve firmware updates for those devices. And in some cases, that might involve end of life and replacing those devices. So actively manage that telemetry and pay attention to what's going on those devices is the best advice we can give.
Okay, next question. Could you talk about the device's local secure boot enforcement mode, strict standard audit, etc., please? Someone in our team mentioned today that if devices are in strict mode, they won't boot without new certificates.
Scott, you're the expert. I have not heard of these modes.
I've not heard. So I can talk through what modes we actually do have. So secure boot is either so there are a number of modes in UEFI relating to user mode and I'm forgetting all the names of the modes. But from a Windows perspective, there are really only two things we care about: enforced and off. That whether it's an audit or anything like that has no impact on the enforcement state from Windows perspective. If you are anything other than enforced, Secure Boot is off, and we're getting no protection from it. So that audit mode is another way that Secure Boot is not enforcing anything. I've not heard the term strict mode. Strict mode, in my mind, sounds like Secure Boot enforced. Secure Boot enforced is dependent on what the certificates are in the Secure Boot database. If the Secure Boot database has only the 2011 Windows certificate, then it will not accept new boot managers. If you have the 2023 certificate, then it will accept the new boot managers and will be fully serviceable. So if you can post another question with some more detail on those terms, we can get you more.
Yeah, Scott, I do wonder if this is a specific feature of the firmware that they may be looking at. You know, I have seen some firmware out there which allows you to say, I will only boot the Microsoft bootloaders, signed bootloaders, or Microsoft plus third-party bootloaders. They have a number of options like that, and they could be calling strict, you know, only boot Microsoft basically. So we need to know a bit more about the firmware, but I suspect that may be a firmware setting specific to their devices.
That's an awesome point, Richard. The other thing to note is if Windows deploys the new certificates to your device, so you get from either the CFR or the LCU, get certificates deployed to your device. And then after that point, you go into UEFI and change the Secure Boot configuration, you may lose the settings that we push down. The behavior of firmware is not well specified by the specifications, and the behavior of firmware varies quite a lot here. Some firmwares will just overwrite the Secure Boot variables with what they have that they shipped in firmware, which may mean that you lose that updated certificate, and there can be some negative impacts there. For example, if you have a updated boot manager that requires the 2023 certificate to boot, and Windows has installed it, it's all working great, then you go into firmware and change the firmware settings. If that certificate is removed, if firmware just overwrites it with its default configuration, you may lose the 2023 certificate and may not boot on that next boot cycle. If that happens, it's important to, you have to potentially go into Secure Boot, into firmware, and select an option that includes the 2023 certificate if there is one in your firmware. If not, then you need the recovery media that boots from the 2011 signed boot manager, reinstalls the 2023 signed boot manager. And that's something that we have linked. Kevin?
And this is one of the main reasons why we recommend that customers install the latest firmware updates available. In many cases, OEMs have updated that firmware so that the defaults now also include the new 2023 certificates, which will help you avoid the problem that Scott just described.
That's right. Okay, so next question. We've been seeing devices that appear to be eligible for automatic Secure Boot certificate-based cert updates based on the documentation via Microsoft, but don't seem to progress. Can you confirm the minimum eligibility checklist for the automatic Secure Boot certificate updates? OS baseline update level, Secure Boot diagnostic data, etc. And which items are hard blockers versus recommended? Once a device is eligible, what is the typical timeline, hours, days, weeks to observe progress?
So, I mean, there will definitely be devices right now that are not getting the update through CFR or the LCU, right? We have not gotten to the point yet where we have rolled out to all devices. So it's very possible that someone could see a bunch of devices that they think are ready to take the update through CFR or through the LCU, and they are not yet getting the update. Those devices will likely see the update in the coming months, but it's possible that that's what's being seen in this situation. And this is where, when Scott talked earlier about knowing your environment and having a plan for devices that don't eventually get the update. But if you're not seeing event logs saying that this device is blocked because of firmware issues, then most likely you're just waiting for the CFR or LCU ready to include your devices.
Yeah, I definitely emphasize that we're doing this as a very cautious approach. So the ramp up is starting out slow and will progress faster as we get more confidence in how the devices are responding. So next question, can you elaborate on the difference between the active DB and the default DB? This seems to be a common point of confusion.
Sure, I can take that one. So active DB is what's enforced by Secure Boot. So right now, when you boot, every time you go through and try to load a binary into UEFI, it will check the signature on that binary against the active DB. That's all it pays attention to. Default DB is what's used when the firmware wants to configure the DB. So if you go into the firmware menu and you change a configuration, you turn off Secure Boot, turn it back on, all of those conditions may cause firmware to want to reconfigure what's in DB. DB default is what the firmware may use to decide on that default state that goes into DB. This is something that is specified in the UEFI specification, but is implemented very broadly, very differently across different OEMs. Different firmwares have different strategies for selecting the right certificates that go in there. Some have multiple different choices, like somebody mentioned a strict mode earlier. That may be one of their choices. I know the Microsoft Surface devices give you a couple different choices. And so the concept of DB default, which is a single default, may not be the way that's implemented in your firmware.
Okay, next question. If diagnostic data telemetry is disabled, what specifically stops working? Does it prevent Microsoft from delivering the secure boot updates altogether, or does it mainly impact reporting and insight?
So that device will basically not get updates through the controlled feature rollout path. However, the updates, the firmware, are already in the LCU that have been installed on devices since the middle of last year. So the code, the logic, the certificates themselves are sitting there on those devices already. And we are updating the LCU ready bucket of devices twice a month. So for those of you that take the optional de-release, fourth optional security updates, optional non-security updates that we ship at the fourth week of every month, and then obviously the Patch Tuesday updates. Each of those updates adds new devices to the LCU ready list. And so even if you turn off telemetry, if you have a device that is marked LCU ready, it will still get the update. And even if you have turned off telemetry, you can still manually deploy the certificates of those devices. The only thing you lose is the controlled feature rollout functionality. However, if you have very unique devices that do not exist in the ecosystem, CFR is obviously the mechanism that we use to learn about devices and to gradually roll out the update. If you have those very unique devices, we may not see devices like that, and so they may never enter the LCU ready. And so you would probably have to take some manual action there.
Yeah. Okay. So next question: what is the process to update devices that currently have safeboot disabled?
Is safeboot secure boot?
Secure boot, I assume is what they mean. So it's a good question. In Windows will not update the secure boot keys if secure boot is disabled, because we don't know what the state of that device is, what's going to happen, what's going on with that firmware. So if you want to get to a secure state, the first thing you need to do is enable secure boot. Enabling secure boot however, is not necessarily just as simple as going into the firmware and turning it on. It depends on what's the state of your device. Recently, a bunch of games have started requiring secure boot for the technology in the game, and actually have some really, really great advice, even device specific, of how to turn on secure boot for very specific devices. Do we have that linked from our Get Secure Boot page, Arden?
Our Get Secure Boot page is largely focused on how OEMs are supporting the new certificate updates. But you're right, there's many resources from OEMs, from motherboard manufacturers, and also just generally in the community because of the increased number of customers looking to turn on secure boot.
So yes, in order to get secure, you have to turn on secure boot, and then Windows will see that and update the certificates. But be careful about turning on secure boot. One thing you can do is, usually in the firmware, it's easy to turn it back off if you've turned it on and it didn't work. So if you turn on secure boot, machine doesn't boot, go back in and turn it back off, and then look for resources on the internet to help you with the rest of the configuration steps you might need depending on your configuration.
Yeah, so I think the summary answer to that question is, what's the process to update them? Well, turn on secure boot, and then we'll update them for you. Yeah.
Okay, next question. We have several physical Hyper-V host servers where secure boot is currently disabled at the Windows hypervisor level, while the guest virtual machines have secure boot enabled. Please confirm whether it is still necessary to update the compatible firmware on these Hyper-V host servers. So yeah, so the secure boot on the guests is separate from the host. So the guest VMs have their own firmware that they're working with, and those as you update the devices on the guest, they'll get the certificates, and that's entirely separate from the host. If you're not using secure boot on the host side, then there's nothing to do. But if you are relying on it, then you'll need to update the certificates on the host side as well. So another question, is there or will there be a tool or a series of PowerShell commands that can be used to assess the current state of the computer and the 2023 certificates? So the answer is yes. There are secure boot PowerShell tools right now. They're being updated to give a lot more detailed information from secure boot, and that update's going out in March. And while we're talking about March, back to the Hyper-V server, there's a fix going out in the Hyper-V server to allow KEK updates happening. So if you're relying on Hyper-V server and seeing that the guests are not updating the KEK, that fix should be out in March. Question, should we proceed with the firmware upgrades on the physical Hyper-V server with OEM support before Microsoft releases the fix on March 10th?
So the Microsoft fix is about the guest VMs updating KEK. The firmware upgrades on the physical server are independent of that. So you can go ahead with, if your OEM has a firmware update, follow their advice on deploying that firmware update. But in general, it should be completely independent of the 3B update.
And Kevin, we're going to recommend they should go ahead with the firmware update, correct? Great.
Yeah.
Are there other mitigations we can take in our environment to ensure devices that cannot get the certificates are less vulnerable? I think to start with, leave secure boot on because the protections that have been shipped previously are still there and still protecting you from older vulnerabilities. So, but as far as, I'm not sure if there's other protections. I don't know if any, Scott or...
There are some custom things that you could do, but for the vast majority of customers, no. The answer is, in general, you should follow advice from your OEM and the advice from Windows. If you have a large fleet of devices and you have some spares, sure, go ahead and test the secure boot update on 1 or 2 devices. If it works, then you can build your own confidence that that is safe to install. But in general, leaving secure boot on is your best bet. And if those devices cannot get the current certificates, if they have a firmware incompatibility, you may want to look at replacing those devices eventually.
Okay, so next question. You mentioned that as long as a device doesn't log a specific event ID indicating it's blocked from receiving the secure boot update, the update will be delivered in the coming months. Which event ID are you referring to? 1801? So I'll take this. 1801 is just an event that says the certificates haven't been updated. It's there just to let you know that the state of your machine. The 1808 is the event that says everything has been updated and is good. There is a page that we've published that has, I don't know, probably 15 different events that will give you an idea of how your updates are progressing. So there's success events that say this certificate's been updated or the KEC has been updated, boot manager, so on. We are revamping that page to make it more readable. So expect to see an update on that soon. Next question. I thought I heard someone say that server OS shouldn't be expected to receive updates via CFR. Did I hear you correctly? If yes, can you elaborate? So CFR really focuses on client devices. So it's really about, cautiously rolling out to the large client population and then either through enterprises opting into that or enterprises getting the benefit of that through the cumulative updates. But we don't update servers through CFR, and I think most IT shops wouldn't want us to be doing that. Servers are kind of the hub of productivity, and cautiously updating those is probably the right choice. So making sure that the updates are going to take successfully is in the domain of IT shops to be able to manage that.
Yeah, I mean, CFR is, for one thing, tailored to devices that are managed by directly connecting to Windows Update and taking the updates themselves. For servers, knowing our population, that's a very rare scenario. Most customers running servers are managing those devices themselves. And once you manage the device yourself through WSUS or some internal update management software, you no longer will get CFR. So if you have a server directly connected to Windows Update, you could get CFR then, but that's like I said, a very rare scenario.
I think in that case, it would still be, it would have to be a server running a client OS in order for that to happen.
Right.
Okay, next question. When stating Microsoft will push new certificates through Windows Update, what does that mean specifically in the secure boot pipeline? That you are pushing 2023 into the DB, that you're signing the boot manager in the EFI partition with the 2023 certificate, that you're pushing 2011 into the DBX. What happens when a machine is re-imaged with a factory or custom image? Wow, that's a lot of questions. Okay, so let's start with the certificates have been, and the 2023 signed boot manager have been in the cumulative updates since I think last May. So they're in, if you're keeping your machine up to date, all of that content that you need is on the machine. It's really the last mile or the last step that is what we're talking about, and that step is to trigger the operation to take the certificates from the disk and apply them to the firmware, and then once that happens, apply the boot manager. So everything is there. There was another part of this question about putting the 2011 into the DBX. We are not going to do that. There's no plans at this point to do that. That I think for us the critical thing is to get everybody on the new certificates, and commercial customers, enterprise customers can decide when they want to put that 2011 certificate into the DBX, and that's important for security purposes. Does anybody want to take what happens when a machine is re-imaged with a factory custom?
Yeah. So just to repeat a little bit of what Arden said, the answer to all of your questions is basically yes, that we are pushing the certificates into DB. There are actually 3 separate certificate updates that go into DB: the Windows 2023 certificate, the UEFI 2023 certificate, if applicable for your machine, and the UEFI option ROM certificate 2023 that all go into your machine. And then there's the KEC update. So there are 4 separate certificate updates that go into the DB. And then once the proper certificates are in DB, then we deploy the boot manager to the EFI partition. If you read the details around that 5B update that Arden mentioned last May, there is a bit that you can set in the registry that will cause us to deploy the 2011 certificate into DBX. If that's appropriate for your environment, be very careful with that and make sure you test thoroughly before you roll that out broadly. There are a lot of caveats to deploying that. Getting to the re-imaging, booting from media is one of the danger spots, specifically with machines that are not updated with the 2023 certificate or have the 2011 in DBX, because the media has one specific boot manager on it. When you have a thumb drive, that thumb drive boots from one of the signed boot managers. So it can either be a piece of media that boots from 2011 or a piece of media that boots from 2023. Similarly for PXE servers. So when you're booting off the network, that network server can hand out exactly one boot manager. So it can only hand out one or the other. So the choice to deploy the 2011 DBX requires that you understand all of the media that machines might boot with in your environment and that they're all updated to 2023, and all of the other boot scenarios like PXE. So that's why Arden said we are not currently deploying that broadly in the Windows ecosystem, because there's a big compatibility risk there. In an enterprise scenario, if you test carefully, that can be done safely. When you re-image a machine, that machine will it depends on what image you deploy to that machine. If you deploy an older image before we started doing this, it won't know about the 2023 signed boot manager. So a very old image might try to deploy a 2011 signed boot manager. If you have put 2011 into DBX, you might not boot. If you're deploying current versions of Windows from media, it depends on what the media is. If the media is if you've deployed the updated certificates but not the 2011 into DBX, you should be able to boot off any of the media and you should be fine. The reimage with a current piece of media will keep the 2023 boot manager there. So unfortunately, that reimage question is it really depends on exactly what the image is and how that image is booted and what the state of the certificates on your device are.
And there certainly is work underway across the ecosystem and in customer environments to update that bootable media. But as Scott says, it is a large estate of different media types that are going to need that update and should be part of your planning process.
Yeah, and I see tied to that, we have a question that came in, will Microsoft force revocation of the 2011 certs at some point? Force is a big word. Microsoft will definitely recommend that customers revoke, at least within their environments, once they fully understand that it's safe to do so. We are also planning at some point in the future to put it into our DBX that we ship. However, we need to be very careful with that operation, right, because of the impacts. So while we have that in our plan, it's something that we will, it will probably be a while out until we do that. And we will, be very careful and strategic about how we do that to ensure minimal impact to customers. But our recommendation is definitely that corporate environments, IT departments should, get to a point where all their devices are running 2023, all their media has 2023, everything's 2023, and then flip that bit that Scott was talking about earlier to put the 2011 in the DBX. The DBX is that revocation database, so and then that will obviously keep their environments much safer.
Okay, so next question is, what's the best approach to use for dual boot devices, either two Windows instances or a Linux and Windows setup?
So Windows and Linux, let's start with the easier one. Windows and Linux boot through different certificates. If you have secure boot enabled, the Linux operating system is booting through the 2011 UFI CA, the third-party CA. That CA stays with the certificate update. We don't remove it. Your OS vendor will eventually have available a shim that's signed with a newer 2023 certificate. But as far as I know, none of the Linux vendors have done that yet. So it will continue to boot through that one. Your Windows partition will be booting through the Windows CA, like we've talked about, and will have the behavior we've already described, where it will update and add the 2023 certificate to DB. Once it detects that certificate is there, it will deploy the 2023 signed boot manager, and everything will be fine. The more complex question is two Windows instances, because two Windows instances are both going to be booting through the same certificate, usually the Windows certificate. If you just deploy the new 2023 certificate, it will continue to work because you still have both the 2011 and the 2023 present. As soon as it updates Boot Manager, you'll now have the 2023 signed Boot Manager. One of the features of Boot Manager is designed to be backward compatible. Current version of Boot Manager can boot versions of Windows all the way back to the earliest days of Windows 10 and potentially even before. So when you just let it run the way it's designed and you don't mess with anything, you will boot correctly in both operating systems. If you boot the older Windows instance and do some manual operations, like, for example, trying to deploy Boot Manager, it may roll you back to a 2011 signed Boot Manager. I don't think we've got as much testing on kind of manual operations in the older Windows partition. But in general, if you let the secure boot AI do its default behavior, you should continue to boot in both environments.
And that's advanced installer and not artificial intelligence, right?
Yes. Very artificial.
So next question, is there a plan for Microsoft or OEMs to only ship hardware with new 2023 certs, assuming that when option ROM expires, it will not be possible to certify new devices after this date? For example, will a new laptop model in January 2027 will only ship with 2023 certs?
It's certainly the direction we're headed in. And in fact, now it is our recommendation to, of course, include the 2023 certs, but only bring in the previous 2011 ones where required for compatibility purposes. In the previous couple of questions, we described a number of those cases where they are needed for compatibility. But as bootable media gets updated across the environment, we think we're in a better position to move to devices that are only trusting 2023.
Another question, what is happening with consumer hardware? For example, someone's grandma who doesn't know what secure boot is, but has a 5-year-old Windows 11 laptop. So the answer is CFR is happening for them. So that's, since we're managing those devices, we're ensuring that those certificates are updated. My 12-year-old laptop over here has already taken the updates and worked just fine. So in most cases, that's what we're expecting the behavior to be. Question, is the presence of event ID 1808 sufficient to validate the successful secure boot certificate renewal, or should we additionally verify the certificate expiry details? So the 1808 event says that you have all the certificates, new certificates that you need, and that the boot manager's been updated. So there shouldn't be anything more that you need to do once you get that event. Question, if we don't use Intune, what does Microsoft suggest as the most reliable method? So all of the methods we've talked about, CFR, the cumulative update, the LCUs, Intune, group policy, everything goes through one registry key. So if you're not using Intune, you can be using group policy. If you're not using group policy, you can go and set the available updates registry key as it's documented on our public pages, and the task that runs will take care of it. So even if multiple things go and set that registry key, the right things will happen. And to kind of even emphasize that a little bit more, the 2023 boot manager will not be deployed until the 2023 certs in place. And if you're trying to put the 2011 cert into the DBX to untrust that, that won't happen until you're running the 2023 boot manager. So there's interlocks in place to ensure that you're not getting yourself into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, one thing the Intune team obviously has been working hard on is the ability for customers to understand the environment as it relates to secure boot, right? So they give, dashboards and views and things like that. Generally speaking, customers not using Intune have other mechanisms that they use to understand the group policies in their environment, the events that are firing on all the devices. And so, I would suggest that whatever that mechanism you use so that you understand the events and errors and so on that are happening in your environment, that you look to how you can tailor it for the secure boot rollout, right? So you would want to understand those events that we could be firing on all the devices, and use that to build some sort of view for yourself as to what is the state of your environment, and then you can take action from there.
Okay, next question. If a system doesn't boot after enabling secure boot from the BIOS, what are the mandatory settings to implement for it to work and possibly bring the host back to a secure baseline which allows it to boot with the settings enabled?
So I think this is a little bit too deep a question for us to get into in this forum. There are a number of things that might be necessary to make Secure Boot work. The first thing is, if you go into BIOS, you try to turn on Secure Boot, it doesn't work. The first thing you can do is go back into BIOS and turn it back off. That will get you back to a booting state. At that point, I'd go look for additional resources from your OEM, from other sources on the internet. Like I said, a lot of the gaming companies have been asking their customers to turn on Secure Boot recently. So actually, shockingly, some of the gaming companies have really good resources on this recently. But there are a few too many things for us to go into right now on that particular question. So I'd encourage you to do some research on that.
Okay, next question. Will there be any effect on third-party antivirus if the certificates aren't updated?
I'm not aware of any direct effect. Others might weigh in as well. But this is an important part of our ecosystem that we work closely with as well. And so we've been sharing these same plans with our security ISV partners. So they're very much aware of what's needed to be done here.
Okay, I'm doing tests in my lab and have successfully completed the update of the Secure Boot via registry key, but I noticed that the bootloader is updated with the new certificates will expire in May 2026. Will this be updated automatically during the normal patching process? So I was looking at, somebody asked this question last night. I think what you're seeing when you see that expiration of May of 2026 is the end-level certificate that signs bootloader expires at that time. The certificates that we're talking about are one level up in the hierarchy. So if you go and you drill down and look at that signature on there, and then you look at the certificate chain, you'll see that the next level up, it'll say the 2023 certificate there. So I think that's maybe what you're seeing.
Yeah, and I mean, bootloaders signed with the 2023 cert don't expire in a way that they'll stop booting, right? I mean, once it's signed with the 2023 cert, it will keep booting until maybe one day we revoke the 2023 cert. But at least for now, that expiration date does not mean bootloader will stop working.
Yeah, the firmware does not look at the expiration date. It just says these are the certificates we trust, and so we'll validate it based on that.
Yeah, and if you look at those dates, by the way, that end leaf certificate always expires within the next year and a half. Those roll every year, I think. And the one to look at is one up, which I think expires when the root does in 2037 or something like that. 2035, yeah. So plenty of time.
Yeah. Back to DBs, am I correct in assuming that the default DB will only be updated by an OEM BIOS update? In other words, Microsoft updates would only update the active DB and never the default. Follow-up question, what is the risk of not updating the default DB when the active DB is up to date?
So default DB is not updatable by the operating system. So the Windows cannot set DB default. It can only be set by a firmware update. So the risk, so the only way you could potentially get an updated DB default is to take a firmware update from your OEM. As Kevin said, a lot of OEMs have gone ahead and issued firmware updates that do that. If you don't have that, the risk is if you do something that in firmware, usually you have to boot into the UEFI menu in order to hit a situation like this, and you do something messing with Secure Boot state, turn Secure Boot off, change Secure Boot configuration, you might end up rolling back to DB default, and that could cause an issue. So that's really the only risk. If you have machines with a UEFI password and your users can't get into the firmware, really no risk at all. It's just about going and changing the configuration.
Okay. Is my understanding correct? If you have a common Dell, Lenovo Surface device, you should be fine just to make sure the UEFI BIOS is up to date, and then leave it for Microsoft to update the certificates on the client via CFR. If you have some wacky bit of hardware like custom built gaming PC, odd meeting room system, then you might need to manually add the registry key manually to tag it as a known good system.
Yeah, the important thing there is if it's managed by Microsoft, yes. You know, if it's connected to Windows Update and managed by Microsoft, and we're able to push the update through CFR, then if you have a run-of-the-mill Dell, Lenovo Surface device, it's highly likely you will get the update through CFR. You know, even custom-built devices, I mean, a lot of them are using pretty standard motherboards. I know Kevin is nodding furiously because he's the one that, you know, has those conversations with those OEMs. Yeah, and maybe Kevin, you want to just give a little.
Yeah, I mean, there's 3 examples in the question there. We've got dozens plus more of OEM partners after that we expect the process to work, just as Richard and Arden described.
Yeah. Now, if you, however, are managing it yourself and it does not get the update through CFR, then I would say if it's a run-of-the-mill device, it will probably still get the update through LCU. So again, there's probably little action for you to do there. If you do have, you know, the one that struck me was the odd meeting room system. That is one I would definitely look closely at, because that could be something that we don't see in our CFR rollout. So
yeah, even our ID department, Microsoft Digital, is looking at the conference room devices. They're looking at SAW devices. They're looking at
I don't think anyone knows what a SAW device is. You may need to elaborate.
Secure access workstation, I think.
Secure administrative workstation.
Okay. And even the monitors on, displays on walls that have a IoT device connected to it. So some of those things probably are worth looking at. And I'll emphasize, I think the best thing you can do for yourself is to have that monitoring in place so that you know what the state of all those devices are, and you can see which ones are progressing and which ones you need to give attention to. So let's see. I see that the newest ADMX, ADML template files contain settings to control the secure boot, cert, push, etc. Is this actually needed? No, that's the group policy object that we provided. The idea was we started with the fundamentals. There's a registry key there, and then tried to meet our customers where they are. So group policy, Intune, those types of things to just give you different options depending on what works for you. But it's not necessary to use them. The registry keys work fine. The ADMX, ADML, that just, as I said earlier, just sets the registry key. So it's just giving you other options for getting what you need done.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you could write a script in your environment to turn the reg key on all your devices, but most of our customers like to use policies to control their devices, whether that's MDM or group policy. And so, the ADMX basically gives them the ability to push a policy to a set of devices or all of their devices to control this rollout.
Okay, so when will Windows 365 gallery images contain the new secure boot certificates? I think they should already contain them, because the gallery images contain all the latest updates. I think maybe the piece that's missing for you is if you take one of those gallery images, you still need to tell the OS to push the certificates into the firmware. So that's the final step. For manually installing the secure boot certificate updates, is updating the BIOS the only way to do it? If I'm remembering correctly, the Microsoft provided steps around RegKey, WinCS, GPO mainly prepare the device to receive the updates from Microsoft, but don't actually provide a way to manually install it. Can you confirm? No, so you will not get the certificates through the BIOS. So the certificates are all in files on your operating system. So there's you can go and see them in the secure boot directory. Our whole conversation essentially is talking about triggering the OS to take those files that are already on your system and pushing the certificates into the firmware. So everything's there, and everything you should need is there, except for in cases where there's a firmware issue where you need to get a firmware update.
Yeah, I mean, the RegKeys are not just preparing the device. I mean, setting the RegKeys, group policies, etc., will actually, depending on which ones you set, will actually update the certificates in the firmware. Yes, it's possible to get a firmware update that includes the new certs as well. But we will, if you set the registry keys, or if you're targeted through our CFR mechanism, or if you're in our LCU ready database, we will update the certificates on those devices. It's not just preparing the device.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. The tools exist for most customers to be able to take this all the way through to having the new certificates and migrate to the new boot manager. We know there's some places where firmware updates are available, but the tools are there, and we're working through the process of rolling it out automatically where we can.
Okay, we have 5 minutes left. If we didn't get to your question during today's live stream, we do have our colleagues reviewing and answering in the comments on the tech community at AKAMS AMA Secure Boot. We'll continue to monitor those questions for the next 24 hours in case you're catching up on demand. Any
Yeah.
thoughts?
I mean, the final thoughts are the thing that we've been saying a few times in this call and in the previous call. You know, for me, it's really get out there, monitor, understand your environment, right? If you need to build dashboards or build the tools, or if you need to work with Intune so that you can use the stuff that they're providing. But it's really important that if you have a commercial environment, that you understand the environment and the devices and what the state of those devices is, and that you can continuously monitor each time you take an LCU and deploy it in your environment, how those devices are moving, hopefully from green to red. It's really important that you have a plan to get to June, July this year with hopefully all of your devices in a good state. And if you do see devices that are blocked, you're working with your OEM, you're getting those firmware updates installed. So I think from my side, that's the key takeaway I hope everyone will take from this call today.
Yeah, that's right. Use that inventory. I think you'll see, especially for newer devices you've bought in the past year or two, many of them already have the new certs, and so little to no action is needed. Then if you see ones that are going to need a firmware update to finish the update, make sure you're coordinating to get that deployed, and then let's figure out what the strategy is for the rest in your estate.
Yeah, absolutely. Just echoing, monitor, make sure all your devices are getting updated. Then there are the follow-on steps that you're going to need to do as soon as all of the devices in your estate are updated. Make sure you're managing media updates. You're getting all of your support media, refresh media, etc., Pixie media, etc., updated, so you can be prepared for the steps that come after that.
Okay, and remember these URLs: AKAMS Secure Boot Playbook and aka.ms Get Secure Boot. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.